Developments as well. The Finance Minister confirming government trying to help businesses after the looting and violence and COVID-19. Companies that weren't insured, it seems, will be covered in some way. Also confirming plans to allow people to access a portion of their pension so they can pay off debt. Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko is a development economist at the University of Stellenbosch. Dr. Moleko, good afternoon to you. I suppose economics is about trade-offs. All of this is going to cost a lot of money, 27 billion rand for the social grant. The money does, unfortunately, have to come from somewhere.
Very good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me. I do agree that a lot of this is about trade-offs. What we have heard from the Minister of Finance announcement today is that there was a surplus collected, particularly from mining revenue, from the corporate income tax, but also terms of trade that were on the upside in Q1. So as a result of that, we are ahead in terms of revenue collection, and there is some small amount, or approximately 2 billion, that is being reprioritized to form part of this 36.2. In the discussion, it seemed like it's an additional 2.65 billion, and the 36 that amounts to 38.85 billion as support, primarily for what happened 2 weeks ago. So I don't want us to take this out of the economic restructuring discussion. It really is targeted at what's happened in the last 2 weeks and helping small businesses, helping our security cluster have more resources allocated, and helping our vulnerable and marginalized households to be supported directly with the small relief that is offered now.
I mean, it's curious in a way that this is now until the end of March next year, which makes you wonder. I mean, it's the end of the financial year for government, but it makes you wonder what will be announced in the budget next year. Do you think the politics and maybe the economics around the basic income grant has changed? Is this the forerunner to that?
Well, the discussion was very clear. I think there were a lot of pointed questions to the minister on that, and he refused to answer. In fact, let me say what he said verbatim. He actually said, maybe future policymakers will have the answers. And I'm hoping that we are the ones who will bear the brunt of the decisions that are actually made today. And I think that what is important is that, are we making decisions for the long term, or simply making short-term interim decisions that are not going to change the economic trajectory of the country in the long run? And I think the questions that we then need to ask is, are these measures going to generate enhanced revenue collection for SARS? We know last year they had a shortfall of 200 billion. I know that the estimates were around 300, but 200 billion shortfall is not a small amount. But secondly, our growth contracted. And the question is, are these interim measures going to offset or merely stabilize the already tricky situation that South Africa's economy is? And I think from what we have seen is that the temporary employment relief scheme, which is now being proposed, the extension of the social grants, isn't really targeted at the restructuring efforts, which is more the long-term issues. And I think that's where the emphasis also needs to go. But I do want to say that the temporary relief that Treasury is offering businesses that are affected by what has happened is much needed. And the support that the Department of Small Business and DTIC need to quickly give the clarity on what are the requirements, what are the prerequisites, who can apply, why, so that businesses can come up and running, businesses can resume economic activity of trading, and that businesses that need to be rebuilt are quickly given the necessary support so our people can be employed in those sectors, and we mitigate and try and reduce the negative and adverse economic impact as much as we can. But efficiency is key in this regard. So it must be looked at from a positive light, and the support is needed for those businesses.
Dr. Moleko, there are all sorts of arguments that go around here. I mean, in some ways, you're described as a development economist. I mean, they're obviously very different. There's a very wide spectrum of economics. In your view, would a basic income grant do what some people believe it will do and stimulate demand, help our economy by stimulating demand because there'll be more money for consumption? Or would the amounts that people are talking about, 350 now, 525 rand maybe, simply not be enough to stimulate demand in any way?
So the question you're really asking me is, what tool is sufficient to actually get the South African economy growing? That's how I'm understanding your question. And then the secondary question is the basic income grant perhaps one of the tools or measures that we can make use of in this regard? My first question is this, is that the quickest way and the most efficient way to actually stimulate economic recovery is through productivity. is through making sure that people are actually employed, because there is a three-prong effect in terms of the multiplier. One, productivity enables companies to actually generate more productivity that enables SARS to actually capture more through corporate income tax. Two, you have employees that are actually able to get an income, so they have higher level of disposable income that they can then spend, and that has a wider effect on the VAT as well. So in the long run, both the VAT and the economic activity in the local economy is actually improved. And I think three, the direct employment of individuals who are on the main, having their dignity and their employment improved by virtue of contributing to something productive. So I think that the mitigating measures, I fully agree that the short-term interim relief is needed. So South Africa has a 13 million number of people in poverty. Recent updates of numbers is 13 million are currently living in poverty. Hunger poverty is a serious issue in South Africa that many of our people are actually faced by. But the issue is, how do we make sure that from a fiscal perspective, we are able to sustain the revenue generation that is needed to finance government and its social endeavors? And that comes from improved productivity, enhanced industrial activity, enhancing our growth trajectory across economic sectors, and primarily, Stephen, those economic nodes that have never really been on the mainstream of the economy. So you find that 40% economic activity coming from KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng means that there is not an equitable distribution of resources. You add Western Cape to that, and you'll find that the majority of the outskirts must come from those areas. So from a long-term perspective, I think that we've got to look at productivity enhancing mechanisms. We've got to look at long-term employment absorptive capabilities. And I think the third thing that we're not looking at is, from a social policy perspective, if the only aspect we're looking at is a short-term interim relief, but we don't look at the precarious nature of the labor market that excludes 11.4 million people that are the beneficiaries of the grants, whether it's the social relief distress grant or would be beneficiaries of the big, I think that we are hitting ourselves or shooting ourselves in the foot. The labor market, which is unable to absorb our people, needs to be dealt with in a way to say, how do we respond to this labor market that doesn't absorb the unemployed? How do we make sure that the skills bias for the high intensity skills is dealt with, and we are able to absorb those people who need employment? And how do we improve the employment or the skilling of our people so that they can be more productive? These, for me, are long-term measures that are much more needed, which will enable revenue generation, long-term sustainability of our people, and making sure everyone is economically active and participating in the economy. And that is what should be our end goal. Everyone economically active and fully participating in South Africa's economic future.
Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko, thanks very much indeed.